I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. I spent a lot of time outside, and I loved all animals, including bugs, frogs, lizards, etc. My little brother played a lot of sports, so on weekends, I was always dragged to his games, and after school, I often had to attend his practices. It was soccer season. I had to go with my mom to one of my brother's soccer practices after school on this day. I was probably 8 or 9 at the time. It was a local park surrounded by some wilderness and hiking trails. I liked this park because off to the side of the soccer field, there was a creek with frogs and other things. I would love to go over there, look at them, and try to catch them. It was evening time and the sun was setting, but there was still plenty of light left. I told my mom I was going to go down to the creek and catch frogs. I was down the hill slightly from the fields and obscured by some bushes and shrubs, but there was a clear dirt trail that had ran alongside the creek. So I scurried on down there and was carefully studying the creek, looking for frogs, when suddenly a man's voice startled me. "What are you looking for?" I looked up and saw a middle-aged man dressed in typical office and business wear, button-up shirt, slacks, dress shoes. He was standing on the trail, blocking my route back up to the soccer fields, looking at me and smiling. I was a shy and cautious child, so I just looked at the man and didn't reply at first. My spidey senses were already tingling, and I remember feeling nervous and uneasy. I sometimes saw hikers on the trail by the creek, but his outfit and appearance told me that he wasn't a hiker. He then asked me, "Are you looking for butterflies? I saw some down there." And he pointed further down the trail, away from the soccer fields. I just said no and started looking around at what my options were. I felt the need to get out of there quickly, but as I mentioned, he was standing on the trail, which was my route back to the fields. There were thick bushes on the hillside between the trail and where the fields were. I started making my way up the rocks to the side of the creek toward the trail, further down from where he stood, and to my alarm, he started moving down the trail toward me, saying, "Do you need some help?" I was now starting to panic. Although nothing had happened, and he seemed friendly, it just felt wrong to me. I just got stranger danger vibes. I remember feeling a burst of adrenaline and fear, and I shouted no, and booked it up the rocks, across the trail, and crashed my way through the bushes towards the soccer fields. I remember the branches scratching me, but I didn't care. I literally scrambled my way through them until I came up to the fields and then sprinted over to where my mom was watching my brother's practice. I probably looked like hell, so she, of course, asked what the heck just happened, and I told her. I felt like she thought that I was being paranoid, though. I'll never know if this guy posed a real threat or not. He could have just been getting some fresh air on his way home from work, who knows? I just know that it felt really creepy at the time. Last November, my brother was visiting us from Dundee with his 3-year-old son. Since my brother had moved from Glasgow, we didn't get to see him or his family too often, so we cherished any time we got to see them. Unfortunately, his wife could not travel down due to work, and just a day into his visit, he was called back for an emergency. His nephew wanted to stay as we had bought him 2 tickets to the football game the next day, so I agreed to take him back to his dad in Dundee after the game. The only train I could get was a fairly late one, and therefore the last one of the day. So I took my nephew to the football game and headed straight to the station afterwards. The train was pretty busy, but I had booked 2 seats for us, and just as we were about to board the train, the man standing next to me made an odd comment saying, "Like sardines? Aren't they? I hate sardines." I found this fairly odd, and I just awkwardly laughed it off. I've never been good at making conversations with strangers and always feel uneasy when one approaches me. As we made our way to our seats, I noticed an old couple sitting in them. I told them those were our seats, but they were fairly rude and told me that old people shouldn't have to stand for a journey. I always hated confrontation, especially in public, so I just left. There were no 2 seats together anywhere on the train, so my nephew and I were forced to stand for about an hour until many people on the train finally got off when it stopped in Perth. My nephew and I sat down, and I mistakenly fell asleep as I was so tired after a fairly long day and standing for an hour on the train. As my nephew was only 3, he obviously fell asleep as well. I awoke just as the last passengers were getting off at Dundee. I quickly jumped up and tried to get my nephew off the train as quickly as possible. But he was too slow, and I had to stay on the train with him, meaning that we missed the stop. As the train was delayed slightly, it was now going straight to Aberdeen, which was about an hour or so away. I sat down and tried to phone anyone I knew, but I didn't have any signal. I began to panic, as I knew that there would be no return trains from Aberdeen at this time of night, likely meaning that I would have to stay there the night in a hotel. I tried to compose myself and look about the train to see if there was anyone who could maybe help me. My carriage had more or less cleared out by this point, and there were only 3 other people left. An older woman sleeping a few rows in front, a young man reading a book at the opposite side, and a 3rd man behind me. I told my nephew to go back to sleep and started trying to plan what I would do when we got to Aberdeen. As my phone had no signal, this was obviously fairly difficult, and I thought that I should ask the man behind me for help. I looked in the window's reflection at him and noticed that it was the same man who made the sardine comment earlier. He was a middle-aged man, fairly average build and height, and there was nothing to suggest that he was in any way dangerous, except one thing. He was staring right at me. I looked away for a minute, thinking maybe he was just looking about the train as I did only a moment ago, but when I looked again, he was still staring. His stare didn't seem to break until he got to presumably go to the toilet. I debated switching to another carriage, but before I could gather my stuff and wake my nephew, he returned. Only this time, he sat in a different seat, facing me directly. A few uneasy minutes passed before he made his first comment. "Someone's sleepy," he said, nodding to my nephew. I laughed awkwardly and put my earphones in to avoid having to talk to him, even though my phone had just died. "Must be some set of earphones if they can listen to music when your phone's dead," he said, and my heart dropped. "I'm only kidding you," he said, "but now I have no excuse to avoid conversation with you. So, are you going home or visiting someone?" he asked. I made the mistake of telling him what had happened and that I had missed my stop. "Well, that's quite the situation. You won't get a train back at this time." I nodded and said that I would find a hotel for the night. He then approached my seat and sat across from me. "Hotels will be all booked out, and even if they aren't, they'll charge you a fortune. I got a place not too far from the station. You can stay there for the night and get the train in the morning. I'll stay out of the way of you and your son, don't you worry." I explained to the man that it was not my son, and that I was happy to pay for a hotel. I tried to stay polite by saying that I didn't want to be a nuisance for him, even though I really just wanted to tell him to go away. "Oh, believe me, you won't be any nuisance to me," he said in a very overly friendly tone, and I was now feeling extremely unnerved, but still tried my best to talk myself out of the situation. This conversation carried on for another 10 minutes or so, and he was increasingly insistent that I stayed with him. I didn't have any idea what to do. I felt completely helpless. I told him I needed to use the toilet, and in an effort to get away from the carriage, that's when he grabbed my wrist below the table. "You're not going anywhere," he said in a hushed tone. "You're staying with me. I'll keep you safe," he said in an extremely chilling voice. I couldn't even bring myself to scream out in that situation. The only other passengers in the carriage were at the opposite end, and I was terrified that if I screamed, the man would hurt me or my nephew. He wouldn't let go of my wrist and repeatedly began saying, "Just act natural." The remaining part of the journey seemed to last a lifetime, and I knew even then and there that there was no light at the end of this tunnel, as this man would not let me go. The train finally reached Aberdeen, and the man told me to wake my nephew, not to alarm him, and to tell him that we were staying at this nice man's house for the evening. He held my hand as we got off the train, and my worst fears were coming true, as I knew what would happen when this man got us back to his house. All of a sudden, I was knocked to the floor in a heap of bodies. The police had tackled the man and were now arresting him. As he got to his feet, I grabbed my nephew's hand and ran only a couple of yards before completely breaking down. The police comforted me and told me that the young man who was reading his book on the other side of the carriage had noticed what was going on and sent a text to the British Transport Police, whose number is all over the walls of the train on posters. It took me a couple of minutes to process everything, but I managed to gain enough composure to thank the police and express my gratitude towards the man who had sent the text. I only managed to say a few words to him, but I'll forever be grateful to him, as he saved me from what would have been a night of terror, and very possibly saved me and my nephew's life. The police very kindly took me and my nephew back to Dundee, where my brother and his wife were extremely relieved to see us. It's now been some time since the incident, but it has had a lasting effect on me, and I always make sure that when I'm traveling late at night that I am accompanied by someone and never run the risk of missing my stop, ever again. I was chatting to a friend and remembered this creepy story from the pandemic. I'm a 30-year-old female and living alone. I had no car and no shops nearby. It was 9 p.m. and I had just gotten back from work and realized that there was no food in the house, so I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to COVID rules. There was no knock at the door and I saw a tall, skinny guy standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it on the floor and back up. He said no and that he had to hand it to me as it had alcohol in it. I hadn't ordered any alcohol, so I told him that he had the wrong order. He claimed it was correct, and I told him sternly to put it on the floor and back up. Again, he refused. Stupidly, I was tired. I opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to COVID rules, and he stepped towards the door and put his hand on the handle. I pulled it shut and shouted to leave it or I was reporting him. He put it down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did so, but again, when I opened the door, he stepped forward. I always remember the chill down my spine when he said, "Pretty, very pretty," in a low, monotone voice. I noticed that he had his phone out pointed at me and asked what he was doing. He said that he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face and not the bag on the floor. I grabbed it and slammed the door shut and locked it. I watched through a crack in the curtains as he stood by the door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind. He knocked, but I ignored it. I was getting seriously creepy vibes and called my best mate for advice. She told me to report him and to not open the door. I shouted out the letterbox for him to leave, but he just still stood there. My dog, who was normally the sweetest little thing, had picked up on my anxiety and began barking at the door. He turned and got into his car that was parked across the street from my house. I kept watching for the next 10 or so minutes through the window, but he wouldn't leave. He just sat there, but I figured maybe he was picking another order to take. Suddenly, a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in the car and asked me to come get it. I checked my order and it was all there, so I messaged saying that it wasn't mine. He got insistent, saying that he couldn't leave until I picked it up. He was practically begging me to come to the car, saying that it wouldn't take a minute and I could grab it from the passenger side. I lost my mind. I told him that I'd heard what he'd said, and that I knew that he was taking a picture of me and not the order and that I was calling the police now. He still said that I had to come get it. The entire time I was on the phone to the police, he was still messaging me, even saying, quote, "The police not come. Pick up order and I leave. Why are you making it hard?" The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with the doors locked. My dog was going nuts, hackles up, barking. My neighbor's husband, who was 6'4" and built like a brick shed, texted me saying that he heard a commotion and asked if I was okay. I told him what was going on and he immediately ran out, shouting at the guy that the driver was a predator and to F off before he got F'd up. The delivery guy peeled out of there and my neighbors came over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both of them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. The police never came back to me. I got a car shortly after and didn't use Uber again until my boyfriend eventually moved in. This happened a few years ago at around mid-November. My mother and I love being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided that we wanted to go out for a quick walk. As we walked back home, we went down this one side street that we use all the time. It's a neighborhood street that leads to the main street and then back into our neighborhood. We get halfway down the street when I hear a dog bark over the music on my phone. I turn it off and turn to look for the dog because I love dogs and I wasn't aware that there was a big dog on this street. Now, some context. I know quite a few people on the streets and I know which houses have dogs. Most of the people on the block have small dogs or cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big dog. I spun around and saw a big dark mass just feet from me. If he stepped 2 more feet, he would have been able to grab me. I immediately felt weird and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point didn't realize that I had stopped. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that I thought that we were being followed. She turned around and grabbed my arm and told me that there were 2 men right behind us. We started walking in a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew, one of the dudes started to make small chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for y'all to be walking, huh?" I swear his voice sounded like the definition of the siren's voice, luring sailors to their doom. He continued asking us questions, and my mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, I knew that we were in danger, so I went to dial 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he would be able to get to us quicker because we were almost home. We got to the busy street and looked behind us to see them speed walking to us. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on the other side. We looked across the street and both men were now gone. We got into the car and searched the streets, but these guys had disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom if we would have been kidnapped if I hadn't heard that dog, and she asked me what dog. I asked her how she didn't hear that massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing is. I still have no clue what it was that I heard, but I do know that it was most likely what saved my life.